Well, Cabinet recently approved a policy to guide legal reform on intellectual property. To tell us more about this, I'm joined by Marumo Nkomo, who is the Director for Legal and International Trade at the DTI. Thank you so much, Marumo, for your time today. It's taken some time, 9 years to get here? Why has it taken so long?
Good evening, Siki, and good evening to the people of South Africa. Let me thank you for the opportunity to engage with the South African public. So your question is a good one. Why did it take a long time? I would say that the major challenge was the need to ensure that we had a system in place that could facilitate strengthened intra-governmental coordination. Okay. In South Africa, we have many government departments that deal with IP, and there was a lack of coordination. So this policy now has been developed pursuant to a strengthened intra-governmental coordination mechanism. And hence, since we started our new efforts in 2016, we've been able to move very quickly. And
let's talk a bit about that intra-governmental effort, because with this particular phase of the policy, you chose to focus on public health. Why public health specifically?
Correct, Siki. So not only public health, but also South Africa's approach to international intellectual property cooperation. Okay. But public health, as you know, is a very key area. The right to health is a very important fundamental right, and also it's also important to be aware that we needed to proceed in a way that allows us to harness the capacity that we have within the state. Yeah. And the health sector within government is an area where we have a lot of expertise, a lot of capacity. So we wanted an approach that will allow us to be able to work very comprehensively on areas where we have expertise that are also very important for our people, and also in particular where intellectual property rights are concerned, the intersection between health and IP has been a very important and quite a contentious area for a while. Okay. And it's an area that we really need to address some of the challenges that exist.
So do you think here now you have some sort of alignment between the pharmaceutical companies and the Department of Health, would you say?
Sure. Well, I mean, this has been developed pursuant to a very extensive consultative process. Yeah. Also important, it's been developed in consistency with international best practice. We've worked very closely with intergovernmental organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, UNCTAD, precisely to get best practices on how to most successfully develop this kind of a policy. And so I believe that the spirit of cooperation that we've embarked upon this project with has allowed us to really strike the requisite balance between the rights of innovators on the one hand and the public interest in access on the other.
That's interesting. So when you compare this, I mean, I mentioned that you'd worked with international organizations as well, UNDP, UNCTAD, who also were part of the process. Would you say that it compares quite favorably to how IP is dealt with in other jurisdictions outside of South Africa?
Quite right. So indeed, in fact, if you check the media, UNCTAD, for instance, has about 2 days ago issued a statement of emphatic support. Global thought leaders have also supported us. For example, last year, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, the famous Nobel laureate in economics, came to South Africa in November specifically to voice his support of our policy, which at the time was in draft phase. So certainly we have been working with thought leaders internationally, with the relevant experts, the top in the world. Yeah. And so certainly what we are proposing is very much in line with international best practice.
All right, well, drafting policy, this kind of policy on the one hand is important and it's significant, but as you mentioned, there are multiple departments that deal with intellectual property. So you need to then focus on changing the legislative framework so that this becomes a living document. Where is the DTI in that process?
Quite right. Good question. So it's important to note that if you look at the reforms that we're proposing, not all of them require legislative action. A lot of them can be done through executive regulations. Okay. Some of them can be done through guidelines and office practices. But in terms of the process of amending the law where it needs to be, as we've indicated, we've established an interministerial committee on intellectual property. It operates both at technical and political level. So the technical officials have been coordinating and cooperating very well in drafting the policy. So the IMC-IP served as a drafting team for this policy document. And in fact, we've already started our deliberations on how best to give effect to the policy through legislation.
Some of the international organizations that you'd worked with have suggested that the next phase should potentially look at the informal sector. Is that what you're going to be doing?
Quite right, indeed. I mean, the intellectual property system in South Africa has tended to be a very, highbrow sort of an instrument. It hasn't been very accessible.
Level,
precisely. It's not been very accessible to our people. So, in fact, one of the things that we've done is that we've been working with the World Intellectual Property Organization that's recently concluded a study for us on IP and the informal sector and how best the informal sector can benefit from the intellectual property system. So certainly, this is definitely one of the areas that we'll be focusing on. In fact, already we've adopted what's called the Inventor Assistance Program, which is a program whereby the World Intellectual Property Organization will assist us to connect small businesses with the services of intellectual property professionals to assist them in actually making use of IP at a very low cost. Oh. So, these things will be ongoing, and through the next phase, that will be a very, very important element.
Good to know. Thanks
very much, man.
Today, Marumo Nkomo is Director for Legal and International Trade at the DTI.